All right, welcome to the CAM podcast, episode 2. We are privileged to have back here today Father Emmanuel Charles McCarthy for our second podcast. For those of you who listened to our first one with Reverend McCarthy, he is a priest in the Catholic Church, the Melkite Rite of the Catholic Church, and he is here to speak to us today about gospel nonviolence and Mother's Day, since it is Mother's Day today. I think it's interesting that Father McCarthy has actually been married to his wife Mary for 53 years, and they have 13 children together and 21 grandchildren. So we will definitely put more information about Father McCarthy in the description of this podcast, but all you really need to know is he's basically the world's foremost expert and speaker on gospel nonviolence, and he has spent his life preaching Jesus' message of nonviolent love of friends and enemies. So Father McCarthy, perhaps you could explain quickly how you came to be a married priest, since we're talking about Mother's Day today, and you obviously have experience from not only having your own mother, but being married to someone who's the wife of 13 children.
Well, sure, Ellen. I was born and brought up a Roman Catholic in Boston. And when I was about 18, I started to attend the Byzantine Catholic Church in Boston. At that time, it was the Russian Byzantine Catholic Church, but all the Byzantine Catholic churches, they have the same Divine Liturgy Mass and the same services and the same theology and so forth and so on. And they are quite different from the Roman Catholic Church, not in the content of what they teach, in the sense of they believe in God and Jesus is the incarnation of God and the Blessed Mother and so forth, but their way of presenting it and approaching it and celebrating it and is different. It's quite different, and much older than even the old Roman Mass. The old Roman Mass, the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass, as they call it today, was about 500 years old. The Mass, or as we call it, the Divine Liturgy, that the Byzantine Church celebrates, whether it's Russian or Arab or Bulgarian or Greek, is 1,500 years old. The Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. So it's the same liturgy, by the way, the same Mass, by the way, as, if you will, that we celebrate, that all Orthodox churches celebrate. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, etc.
Okay.
And the only way you would tell the difference is that in the Eastern Catholic churches, in that liturgy, the Pope is commemorated, whereas in the Orthodox Church, the Pope is not commemorated. But I think, as probably most of your audience knows, the Orthodox have absolutely valid sacraments. So a Divine Liturgy, a Mass in the Orthodox Church, is as valid as any Mass in the Catholic Church, as well as all the other sacraments. So anyway, I at 18 years old, I began going to attending the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Catholic, Eastern Catholic Church and Byzantine Catholic Church in Boston, and stayed with it until so that would be 1958. Stayed with it until the early 70s, when for some reason or another the cardinal closed down the Russian Catholic Church in Boston. My general understanding was he closed it down because the priest there was losing the distinction between Christianity and anti-communism.
Oh, interesting.
And you could see that, that a church that lived under communism in Russia, that's where its patriarchal lands were and people came from, would be very much anti-communist, and there could be easily the confusion of using Christianity as a tool to fight communism versus as an instrument for salvation. I think that happened to a large extent. Interestingly enough, today's May 13th. That happened to a large extent in the Roman Church with the Fatima phenomena. It became an anti-communism phenomena, and therefore a great deal of its potential spiritual power was truncated. Well, anyway, I when the Russian Church was closed down, Russian Byzantine Church, I began to attend the Melkite Byzantine Catholic Church. Melkite is the Byzantine Catholic Church of the Middle East. That is of basically Syria and Jordan and Palestine and Egypt and Lebanon. And so I began to attend there, and so years and years later, in 1981, I was ordained a Melkite Catholic priest, Byzantine Catholic priest in Damascus, Syria, on August 9, 1981. And in the Byzantine churches, the diocesan priests are normally married. That's the normal, both in Catholic and Orthodox.
Okay.
The monks are celibate. So the church that I was married in Damascus, the priest there, Michael, he had been married 46 years, and he was the pastor of that parish. He was a priest and pastor of that parish for 44 years. In other words, there was a tendency not to shift priests around from parish to parish. The tendency was the priest grew up with the people, and they knew him, and he knew them, and he had his children there, and he had his grandchildren there, and wife and family. So it's a different kind of operation, if you will. So I was ordained there in 1981, August 9th, and I had at that time several children, 8, I think, and then after that we had we had more, and that's basically the situation. In those days, in 1981, in order to be ordained a married priest, in order to be ordained a priest in the married priest in the Melkite Church or any of the Byzantine churches, you had to go to what was called patriarchal territories, which meant you had to go to where the church originated, which in my case was Damascus, and other people, in the case of Ukrainians, was Kiev or so forth, and get ordained in patriarchal territories. That is no longer the case. Pope John Paul II, in 2004, I believe, issued a edict or whatever it's called to saying that the Eastern Catholic churches could ordain married men in the United States. They didn't have to go to patriarchal territories as they did when I was ordained and then come back here. So that's basically the history. It's normal. It's regular for diocesan priests in the Eastern Catholic churches, Byzantine Catholic churches, to be married.
Well, that's really neat. I think it lends you a certain perspective too with our topic today, because I think when we think of Mother's Day, we think about the mother being the heart of a family, and just knowing that you do have that experience with family life. I'm interested to see what you're going to tell us about it. So thank you for the background. What do you think are the main connections between Mother's Day and gospel nonviolence? This is a topic I haven't really heard you talk about before, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, first, excuse me, Ellen. First of all, there's no connection between Mother's Day as it exists today in the United States and gospel nonviolence. Zero connection.
You mean that there's no connection between going out to brunch and having mimosas? And
well, no, I mean that today it's pretty much a sales pitch for florists, you know?
Yeah.
And that sort of thing there, and it's become Mother's Day. However, that is not what Mother's Day was or started out as. Mother's Day was something quite different and quite directly related to gospel nonviolence. Mother's Day the first Mother's Day was in 1870. And the person who created it or initially presented it in a public forum was Julia Ward Howe. Now, Julia Ward Howe was somewhat famous. She was also the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. You know, my eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That hymn there.
And that hymn very much associates, it glorifies war.
It does, and it doesn't necessarily have to, but that's the way it was used and has been used ever since, you know? So, but anyway, she herself was, 1870, of course, was a few years after the terrible events of the Civil War, in which more Americans were killed than any other war in its history, you know, and the terrible slaughter of Gettysburg and so forth and so on. But anyway, she just became absolutely positively convinced of the fact that there was no basis whatsoever in real human life for people killing each other. That this was just wrong from the beginning, regardless of how they justified it was evil. And she began to think about what you have to do about it, what could be done about it. And it became clear to her that men, that is, genetically men, you know, the gender man, that men were helpless in the face of war, that their consciousness had been so created over periods of centuries, if not millennia, that they were blinded to the realities of war, even though they, for the most part, engaged in it. They had created myths and stories and all kinds of fairy tales of heroism around it that just blinded males to the reality of war, and it became in their mind something glorious and something noble and something good and something holy even. And it didn't make any difference whether the men were drinking in a bar room with their buddies who collected the trash for the city, or they were statesmen of high renown, or they were ecclesiastics sitting in the highest chairs of the church. They all, males per se, were, in her eyes, absolutely positively at that time, pretty much oblivious to what they were doing with war, what they were doing in war. And so she was thinking about it, and she looked around and saw the devastation of Gettysburg and other things that were going on at the time in terms of military, killing people. Her insight was that the road to peace was mothers, not fathers, not males, not even women, but mothers. Because as she watched, she saw that a mother's relationship with the child from the first moments of that child's existence in the womb, that created a different kind of feeling in terms of the mother's attachment to the child or bonding with the child. And that feeling of love that starts with the conception and is intensified incredibly at birth, and then goes on, that no mother could possibly want her child savaged in a military battle. And yet what we see always is hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of mothers' children out there slaughtering each other, something that the mothers themselves would not want of their own. So in 1870, She issued the first Mother's Day proclamation, Julia Ward Howe, 1870. And what I like to do here for your audience, is just read that proclamation that was the Mother's Day proclamation, the proclamation that initiated Mother's Day in the United States. So here it is.
Great.
1870. Julia Ward Howe wrote, "Arise then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts. Whether your baptism be that of water or tears, say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and for applause from us. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another to allow our sons to be trained to injure their sons in war." That was the first Mother's Day proclamation. And it's a paraphrase of the gospel. Only a paraphrase because it doesn't include men. It's very, very focused on mothers, but it is what the gospel teaches, what Jesus teaches, and that is the evil, the brutality, the inhumanity, the ungodliness, the diabolicalness of war, which mothers must work hard to keep their children from participating in. And so it was based, I guess, as I would see it, on a common bond between mothers that all mothers feel in relationship to the child they give birth to. They don't want the child to be slaughtered, to be maimed, to be torn apart on a battlefield by another child. And therefore, the idea is that if I don't want my child to be torn apart and ravaged by fire or flame or steel on a battlefield, then I don't want my child to do that to any other mother's child. And so began Mother's Day. Obviously, and it gradually has deteriorated to what it is today spiritually. It's a day of myth and sentimentality and so forth and so on, and it pretty much is a day that relates only to one mother, my mother, whereas the day itself was directed to all mothers, and directed to them in the terms of calling them to a challenge, to do something to protect their children and to protect all mothers' children. That's the beginning of Mother's Day in 1870. Today, Mother's Day is what it is. It is just a sentimentality day that, like Christmas, is turned into a commercial bounty, and for a few, and it's a nice day. There's nothing evil about it in the sense of being kind, but it's not what Mother's Day was. And so in its origination, in its initial presentation to the world, Mother's Day was utterly consistent with the nonviolence of Jesus in the gospel. As it exists today, it is it's another secular holiday.
Yeah, it is a shame that it has such a strong founding in this peace movement that was born out of an anti-war movement. And I wanted to read something. As you were talking, I remembered there was an article called Matriotism that was written by Cindy Sheehan. I don't know if you've heard of it, but she was the mother of a dead American soldier. He was killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. And she became a part of the to protest the war. She became a part of the anti-war movement called as Code Pink. And in this article, I hear some echoes of the Julia Ward Howe Mother's Day proclamation, even though it's not specifically about Mother's Day, but it is about motherhood. So I'd just like to read a quick passage from that. She said something very controversial. She said that her son died for nothing, which is very offensive to many people. But she believed that her son should not have died in these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so in her article, Matriotism, here's just a couple of excerpts. She said, the neocons exploited patriotism to fulfill their goals of imperialism and plunder. Matriotism is the opposite of patriotism, not to destroy it, but to be a yin to its yang and balance out the militarism of patriotism. Not everyone is a mother, but there is one universal truth that no one can dispute no matter how hard they try. And believe me, some will try. Everyone has a mother. Mothers give life. And if the child is lucky, mothers nurture life. And if a man has had a nurturing mother, he will already have a base of matriotism. A matriot loves his or her country, but does not buy into the exploitative phrase of my country, right or wrong. A matriot knows that her country can do a lot of things right, especially when the government is not involved. However, a matriot also knows that when her country is wrong, it can be responsible for murdering thousands upon thousands of innocent and unsuspecting humans. A true matriot would never drop an atomic bomb or bombs filled with white phosphorus, carpet bomb cities and villages, or control drones from thousands of miles away to kill innocent men, women, and children. There is one most important thing that matriots would never do, however, and this is the key to stopping killing to solve problems. A matriot would never send her child or another mother's child to fight nonsense wars. So I thought that was interesting that she was coming out and kind of appealing to mothers to think twice about allowing their sons or their daughters now to go off and fight in these wars that are kind of created by what Julia Ward Howe would call irrelevant agencies. She seemed to notice that impersonal nature of the state, and that these kids who are sent to die in these wars are kind of caught up in a system. But we don't hear that too much anymore, do we? This kind of idea that mothers are supposed to be for peace and for promoting peace.
Oh, I think that what Julia Ward Howe was reaching towards, she was reaching towards, or reaching into, or trying to reach into a deeper understanding of motherhood than what that every mother has, because they are a mother just for that reason, and life starts in them and so forth. But that my experience is that I have not seen much of a difference between the American woman in war and the American man in war. And what I mean by that is that when the politician gets up there and says, crises, we've got to go to war, the enemy's at the gates, and so forth and so on, women as well as men, have been right there, chanting the slogans and doing all the things necessary to make war possible and to engage in it and to execute it. And today, that of course includes, for some terrible understandings of what liberation of a woman has meant, it includes women going up there in fighter jets and being in the front lines and napalming people and bombing cities and tearing life apart under the name of liberated woman. On the other hand, it seems to me that Cindy Sheehan, who I know and who's done wonderful things. She really had made a serious effort with the use of her life to try to raise the issue of the intrinsic horror and evil of war. I often felt badly, very, very bad, because I've thought of her many times, and because she was well known really at one point way back, and I've often thought that when she said that my son died for nothing, I think she was voicing a truth that every mother of every son that died and was maimed and made mentally ill and committed suicide after coming back from Vietnam has felt. Died for nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's a world out there trying to make Vietnam veterans heroes and trying to make Vietnam War meaningful. And when a mother who has lost her child, never to see him again and never to be with him again in this life, when she looks at why, what is it? Was it because her son died because Kennedy didn't want to lose an election? One reason that they were killing what's going on over there. What was it that Lyndon Johnson was in his mind and heart? What was his motivation? When the day that Kennedy was buried, he undid Kennedy's executive order bringing all the troops back from Vietnam. And then on and on and on we can go with Nixon and Kissinger and etc. There's an irrelevancy. My son went over there, Vietnam. He was slaughtered. Why? For what? I think Cindy articulated something very, very important in that. And I think saying with Cindy, I've often wondered, I never talked to her about it, but I often wondered how much she blamed herself for not protesting and working harder to keep her son out of the military. And I think that can be the case with so many mothers who let their sons go and thought they were going to go and get a job, and after they get out or be trained for something or get a college education, and then they wound up mixed with the mud in Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or wherever these things are going on the politicians create. So Cindy, I think she's I think in her way, in a very good way, she's struggling through a lot of suffering that she was had, and that is taken advantage of, fooled, manipulated in a way that allowed her to let her son go into that situation. And I think that's the case with so many other hundreds of thousands of mothers whose sons have been torn apart, fighting as henchmen for politicians, whether it's in the United States or someplace else, for their agendas or their causes. And when looked at in terms of the death of the son, the cause or the purpose was empty. It was just empty. So the fact of the matter is, there's a Dylan poem, Masters of War song, I guess, and there's a few lines from it that read, talking to the elites who make war. I thought it was kind of interesting, just parenthetically. In one of his last books, Pat Buchanan, who was a conservative columnist and politician writer for 50 years, one of his last books, The Unnecessary War, in which he argues rather persuasively the Second World War never had to happen, and Churchill and Roosevelt knew it. They knew it didn't have to happen. They could have stopped it. But anyway, in the opening of that book, in the dedication area, he quotes someone that I don't remember what the person's name was, an Englishman of some type. And the quote is, "Nations don't make wars, men do. Nations don't make wars, men do. A nation, a state, has no center of personality and no will. What there is there is a human being, whether it's Johnson or Roosevelt or Hitler or Churchill or Mao Zedong, there is an individual human being and human beings who decide that they are going to kill people. Individually, they decide that. And there's the source of war. So that they use the terms our state, our nation, our ethnic group, or our religion, and but the religion, the state, the ethnic group, the economy doesn't kill. It's the individual human being that kills and that sets up the killing, the individual human being that has a personality, and I would say immortal soul. So in Dylan's Master of Wars, there's a little line there, a couple little lines there. We're talking about the people that make wars, that really make wars. I used to go, when I used to do stuff in high school and so forth, 40, 50 years ago, talking on nonviolence, I'd say to the high school kids, I'd say, how many of you, how many of your relatives ever started a war? And they'd look at me incredulously, and I said, well, no one raised their, no one. I said, okay. How many of your relatives have ever fought and died in a war? And of course, the hands of 3/4 or 80% of the class would go up. And that's just the point. Dylan here in this little song, Masters of War, he's talking about the people that make the wars, the big shots, that didn't go out and hire or coerce the little shots to go out and be maimed and killed and ravaged. And here's the little thing from Dylan. You, meaning the elites who make wars, you fasten the trigger for others to fire. Then you sit back and watch. When the death count gets higher, you hide in your mansions. As young people's blood flows out of their bodies and is buried in the mud, you hide in your mansions. And that's about it, Ellen. You see, it seems to me that women, as much as men, mothers as much as fathers, are absolutely inundated, embedded from the cradle with the nobility and the goodness and the holiness and the rightness of war on behalf of their ethnic group, their country, their religion. Julia Ward Howe and Sidney Sheehan, in her way, it seems to me we're trying to break the myth and get lower than the myth, higher, deeper than the myth, and raise the issue to real human beings who are mothers. Do you really want to have your son go out and be ravaged, burned to death, blown apart on a battlefield? And if you don't want your son to have that happen to them, or daughter now, then why do you let your son be trained from the cradle, practically nurtured, brainwashed into believing that killing, ravaging, maiming other people's sons is a good thing? War starts in the cradle, and their war can be ended. The hand that rocks the cradle has enormous power to do good or to do evil. And it's not that mothers or fathers mean to do good or evil. It's they themselves are absorbed in an evil myth about war, nationalism, ethnicism, racism, or religionism that are agencies that legitimate sticking a dagger in people's kidneys or slitting their throats. So where we are is we're at Mother's Day, and no mother today wants her child to go out and tear people apart or be torn apart by people. But practically every mother and father in the United States has been nurtured from the cradle to believe, first of all, that's consistent with what it means to be human. That's consistent with the teaching of Jesus. And if their son has to go, they have to go. That's what Julia Ward Howe was trying to reach beyond, those myths, those lies, when she started Mother's Day back in 1870.
Yeah, that's great. I know we didn't plan on going in this direction, but as you're talking, maybe it's just because I saw the movie Unplanned. I'm sure you've heard about it.
I've heard about it, yes.
Yeah, and I know we don't have time today to get into the whole abortion thing, but I'm literally everything that you're saying is resonating. I'm reading her book, Abby Johnson's book, too. And she talks about this with leaving the abortion industry. She used to be a director of a Planned Parenthood, and she says that, there's this moment that changed everything for her when she had to help do an ultrasound-led abortion, and her hand was the hand that was holding the ultrasound wand over the mother's womb when the doctor said, "Beam me up, Scotty," and goes in and sucks the baby out, dismembers the baby. It was like a 13-week-old baby. And she said that she had this, it was just fascinating because when she gave birth to her first daughter, her hands were the hands that were patting the baby when it was crying, and feeding the baby, and touching the baby's face, and caressing the baby, and clothing the baby. And she said it was my hands that helped, basically, with her work with Planned Parenthood, helped to kill like 20,000 babies. And then it was her hands that nurtured and gave life to her own child. And it's just fascinating because she talks about that very thing. She said that she was blinded by, as just like Julia Ward Howe said, these men were blinded. They were helpless when it comes to war because they've been raised with all these myths. It seems like the same thing is happening to women now, where we're raised with these myths about, women's rights, and thinking, she said, I went into Planned Parenthood thinking I was doing a great thing for women, helping them in a time of crisis, and I was having mercy on them, and I didn't want them and their children to suffer. And I didn't think that the baby could feel any pain. And I thought, well, better to sacrifice this one baby than to have another poor child that didn't have care. And her eyes were opened, and she realized eventually that rather than trying to prevent abortion, Planned Parenthood actually tries to maximize the number of abortions because it makes them a ton of money. And she herself was making a ton of money when she was working for it. And so it calls to mind this idea of this blindedness, that when we're raised with these ideas, it's very similar to me when you hear stories of people who have left war and said this wasn't worth it. As Madeleine Albright said, it was worth it. It wasn't worth it, and it was wrong, but you don't always know that until you see it up close. And that visceral experience, and it just reminded me when you were talking about her story and feeling like she was told a bunch of lies. And she was recruited when she was in college. She was a young girl. She didn't really know anything. And she certainly didn't know about the business side of Planned Parenthood and all the money that gets made. And I feel like a lot of people who go into the military don't necessarily understand the money that's made from these wars and the armaments trade and all of that. And it's interesting that some people, I don't know, they do have that conversion and that change of heart. But it would be better to educate people more, I guess, when they're children, about these kinds of realities.
Ellen, the Pentagon has billions and billions and billions of dollars available to it every year to propagandize the glories of war. You can't look at an NFL football game, a basketball game. You can't go to a Catholic or other university unless there's ROTC stuff all over the place and the glories of the military. Church is the same way. It doesn't billions of dollars. And who are those? Even now today, of course, the military puts out their own video games to entice people into going into the military, and they can play war and so forth and so on. But they are doing that. They are doing that because they know that if they don't do that, if they just leave it neutral and the person is allowed to grow in the Christian faith or in his faith without his understanding of reality, he will not want to go to war, not on any large scale. The propaganda starts at the youngest age and goes right up through college and beyond that, right up to every football game of the NFL, every baseball game. I noticed at some of the talk shows that are on television daily. What do they call it? I don't know what they call it. The Stephen A. Smith show or whatever it is. I noticed that they have military advertisements going across the screen, even as the people are talking. It is understood. Jesus understood it. The first words out of Jesus' mouth in the Gospel of Matthew, the first word is metanoia. That we've translated repent, but the Greek word means change your mind. Like Jesus, the military is going after the mind. And the question is, what are Christian mothers and fathers, for that matter, going to do? Are they going to put in front of that child Christ-like images and thoughts and ideas and senses of value and nobility? Or is it going to be the United States Marine Corps, the Army, and the killing and so forth? Those are incompatible ways of developing the human mind. Technically speaking, the brain is the internal representation of what has been put into it from the external reality. What goes into my brain is what I become. And therefore, if what I'm getting right from the get-go is war, guns, legitimacy of killing, playing war, you name it. It's so large. How could I possibly think anything differently? Even if I was brought up a Christian, because all the Christian faith, the mainline churches, basically all today is legitimators of the violence of the state. They add Jesus as a weapon to the state's arsenal, and they themselves become a weapon, because to motivate or to validate morally an evil is to promote that evil. And that's what the churches and so forth do. Now you mention that these youngsters have no idea what they're really getting into. They don't know. They think of war as something close to a fight on the street corner. War is a premeditated, planned, long in advance, political, economic, military, industrial reality. It's not a fight in the street corner. It's a planned reality. They can't possibly know this. Back about 5, 6, 7 years ago, Allstate Insurance Company had an advertisement, the purpose of which was to justify itself in terms of charging higher insurance rates for drivers between 16 and 24. And what it was a image of a brain, exact image of a brain, and it asked the question, why do we charge 16 to 24-year-olds more for insurance than anyone else? And the answer was, because they don't have all their brains about them. And then they went on to explain that the human brain is not fully developed until 24 years old. That at 16 to 24, there are significant pieces of the human brain, one of which is the evaluation of consequences and the understanding of consequences, that is just really underdeveloped. And therefore, because it is shown statistically to the insurance companies that that part of the brain is not there, they have to charge more because those people are going to get in more serious and different kinds of accidents. Well, those are the people that are recruited by the military. The military is not recruiting people 25 to 35. It's 16 to 24. People that don't have the slightest idea of what's going on and are just all filled up with the myths that their mothers and fathers have taught them from the cradle in the home, and that have their mothers and fathers have allowed them to be inundated with in schools, in churches. And so when a child goes off to war, like Cindy Sheehan's child, he or she goes off to war because their mothers and fathers lied to them about war, what war really was. They told them the myth instead of the reality. And they told them a myth about Christianity instead of the reality about Christianity. That is the reality about Jesus' rejection of violence and enmity. And so we have here on Mother's Day a real question for mothers. Will you stop telling, will you or will you not stop telling your children myths about what war is and give them the hard facts of what happens in war? Will you or will you not bond with other mothers and together say, we're not going to initiate our children into the propaganda of war, whether it be religious or secular or economic or whatever it may be. And the reason for that is because if you don't explicitly reject the myths, you will fall into them as easy as you walk into a lake in water. It's just, that's because you're surrounded by it. So maybe a way of concluding all this, Ellen, okay? I don't know if you want to conclude or not, but I got a way of concluding. But you want to ask one more thing.
No, we should conclude. We don't have much time left, but I want to just in case anyone's doubting who's listening, they don't target the young. They don't propagandize the young. I want to read an article from the Army Times. It's real short. It's from March 27th, and it's called "Most American Youth First Meet a Recruiter at 17, but the Army Wants to Start Younger." Huntsville, Alabama. High school seniors have traditionally been Army recruiting's most reliable target audience, but leadership is realizing that as military service becomes more and more rare and fewer American youth actually know a soldier or veteran, they'll need to make up that gap by reaching out to younger prospects. It's a matter of behavioral economics, the Army Assistant Secretary for Manpower and Reserve Affairs said Tuesday, with the acknowledgement that most young people have made a mental list of what they might want to be when they grow up by the time they've reached adolescence. Quote, "I would argue that in looking at these generations, we have to begin thinking about how they approach this question of where they will apply their talent. We have to confront this question of will we wait until they're 17 or will we start talking to them at age 12, 13, 14, 15 when they form the set of things they are thinking about doing with their life. If we wait until they're 17 or 18, we will not be the first impression. Others will have made that for us." So I think that makes it pretty clear.
Ellen, I'll tell you, if we were videoing this instead of just it being an audio podcast, I could show you pictures of what's called little Marines or young Marines. Kids, they look to be about 11, 12, 10, in Marine uniforms with Marine leaders dressed in combat clothes, going through Marine training with make-believe guns and so forth and so on, shaped like the real thing. I've got so many pictures here of ways in which the military reaches into little children's lives in order to ennoble and normalize the killing of the enemy. I've got pictures here of little kids at a military base signing their names to bombs that are going to go to Iraq and kill people. It goes on and on and on. This is a daily thing, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, backed by billions and billions of dollars that have been taken from taxpayers just to corrupt their children into this. So that the thing is, yes, indeed, Catholic schools even have ROTC. Excuse me. Catholic schools even have ROTC in them in grammar school. Now, high school. What kind of stuff is this? All I'm saying, Ellen, is they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. They're getting control of people by brainwashing before people even have a chance to understand what's going on and make a rational decision as an adult person with full knowledge and full consent. They are basically setting up little kids to be like Pavlov's dog. When Pavlov's dog hears the bell ring, he salivates for meat. And when these little kids hear the halls of Montezuma or the Army song or the Air Force song or the Navy song, they salivate to get in the uniform. This is not the way they are born when they come out of the womb. This is not what's in them when they come out of the womb. This is what the military puts in there from the earliest moment they can. And by the way, Ellen, this is not just the United States. Wherever you look in the world, this is what governments are doing to little children, to their parents, to their mothers, and this is what the church supports, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, supports wholeheartedly worldwide being done to children, when they're supposed to be wholeheartedly helping the parents and helping the children put on the mind of Christ, which is anti-violence, anti-enmity, which is nonviolent love of friends and enemies.
Yeah, and I think one of the major points of confusion, and I know we have to wrap it up, we can address this later, but I think that the quote from Jesus where he says, "There is no greater love than to give up your life for a friend," I often hear that interpreted to say that dying in war is the most noble. There's no greater love, because people in war do form a brotherhood. And they will die for one another. And I have two brothers in the military, and they both said that some of their best friends they made in the military. Well, they're not still in it, but they've said it was the friendships that came out of those intense experiences that were that they still treasure, And so I think that's maybe one of the myths that feeds into this, the idea that Christians can go along with it so easily. Do you have any comments on that really quick? Because I think if anybody was listening and they were Catholic and they really objected to what they were saying, I bet this is probably something that they're thinking in their minds.
No greater love is a man than to lay down his life for his friends is in the context of a presentation of God as love, agape, which is so forth, it's in the gospel. It's Jesus. You will find that, and I have found it, on just about every chaplain's doorpost, every chaplain's office, military chaplain I'm talking about. The problem is that it does not say no greater love is a man than to kill for his friends. It says to lay down his life for his friends. It has little and nothing to do with war per se, going to war or not going to war, although it does reach that point. What it means is we each have our individual human unique existences. We decide. One of the great questions any human being has to work with in life is what to do with time. What to do with my time that I've been given, which is God's time, who gave it to me. What to do with that time, because we are time beings. Therefore, by will, by decision, we can go left or we can go right in that time. We can do this, we can do that. We can do good or we can do evil. Christian love, according to Thomas Aquinas, Christian love is using up your time, your life's time, to do something Christ-like for another person. To do something, in other words, like Christ-like love for another person. That goes all the way down to simply saying a 10-second prayer for him. Jesus, have mercy on Ted, or whatever. I am taking my time, of which is a limited amount in this world, and I am using a piece of it to do good for someone else. That can be given, giving a person a cup of coffee or a cup of tea in love. It can be a lot of things. It can be a mother going out working for a child to send a child to school. On and on it goes. Husbands, wives, mothers, fathers lay down their lives continually. Their time when they could be doing anything else. They could be out with the girls. They could be drinking with the boys. They could be watching this and doing that was pleasurable to them. And yet they're doing something for someone else, a child or a friend or whatever the case may be. That statement is about the nature of love that is genuinely divine as revealed by Jesus Christ. It is giving up your own happiness so that other people can be made whole. It is using up what is yours, your lifetime, so that other people can have the fullness of life. And paradoxically, the teaching of the gospel is when you do that, you yourself receive the fullness of life as you give up your life, as you lay down your life, so that others can have life. That's the gospel. So that when we get to the point of using that statement to justify what is impossible to justify in the gospel, that is the killing, maiming, slaughtering of people, and in the process, you yourself are killed, maimed, or slaughtered, that's blasphemy. If I were the Pope, I'd insist that I can't insist. I wouldn't insist, but I would work hard at getting every military chaplain to get that sign out of his office, because it has nothing to do with dying in the process of killing people.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with dying in the process of loving people as Jesus would love them.
Exactly. And if I was the Pope, I would have them include the whole quote, which I think either right before that or right after that, Jesus says, doesn't he say, and I call you my friends?
I know you, the whole, when you put it in the whole quote context, it's impossible.
Right.
This is used as a proof text. Right?
Yeah, I think he's saying, lay down your life for your friend, and I call you my friend. I think he's talking about lay down your life for Jesus. And I think when you think about it that way, it becomes a completely different thing. It can't just be there's a way, it has to be Christ-like and not just dying.
Ellen, when Judas comes into the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus calls him to kill Jesus, to have him killed for a few bucks. Jesus calls him friend. In the Christian context, my enemy is my friend.
Yes.
I lay down my life even for my enemy. And the model for that is Jesus on the cross. The model for it is God, where we're told by Paul, even when we were at enmity with God, God gave himself up for us. No, this is about the nature of that love, agape, that is revealed in the New Testament through Jesus. And you're not going to take one little quote and turn it upside down, inside out, contort it, and use it, which is what's done, to justify the savagery, the brutality of the mass slaughter of war in the name of Jesus. This is not just blasphemy. What the military chaplaincy does with this is an abomination. It's doing what Isaiah said, woe to you who call evil good and good evil.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe a way of concluding here, Ellen, is, if it would be of any help, many years ago, many Mother's Day ago, I don't know how many now, it's a decade or more, I wrote a pledge, a Mother's Day pledge for mothers. The nerve of me, a father, a man, writing a Mother's Day pledge for mothers.
Yeah, men aren't allowed to tell women what to do or what.
That's right. I'm a Christian, and in Christ there's no male or female or anything else, and there's no question about that. So I'm talking about that we're in Christ here. And so here's the Mother's Day pledge. Mother's Day pledge, and the title of it is A Mother's Pledge. Stop. A mother's pledge to and covenant with every other mother on Mother's Day. And it reads like this: I will not raise my precious child to kill your precious child. And if it is within my power, I will not hand over my beloved child to others to kill your beloved child, or to learn how to kill the one you cherish. There's a pledge for Mother's Day that every mother should make. And if I dare say, every father should make, but quite frankly, the situation, men are so deeply involved in the evil of violence that right now it's probably incomprehensible to most men.
Yeah, that's a great pledge. And I just was thinking too about this being May 13th and or tomorrow being May 13th and the anniversary of the apparition of the Blessed Mother at Fatima. And when she first appeared, it was during World War I, and she told people to pray the rosary every day for an end to the war. So to me, she didn't say pray that the Allies win the war. She said just pray that it comes to an end. So if our Blessed Mother is telling us to pray that the war ends, then it must be evil, right? There cannot be anything holy or good that's happening when she's asking us to pray for it to end, right? I mean, in case we're confused about that, it just seems to me to be very, very clear.
Well, the problem there is, Ellen, is that Fatima is private revelation that no one has to believe in, Catholic or otherwise. You can believe in it, but you don't have to. And you don't want to take focus off what is the public revelation, which is the absolute infallible certainty of what God's will is as communicated by Jesus Christ, and that is the total rejection of violence and enmity in the Gospels, both in word and in deed. So I tend to not go to the realm of private revelation in talking about gospel nonviolence, because what one private revelation will build up, another one will tear down.
I see.
And
okay.
So I'm a little cautious in doing that. God said it. Jesus is God, and case closed.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Well, happy Mother's Day to your beautiful Mary, your wife, and to all of your daughters that you've raised. And thanks for being here with me again today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Ellen. It's great to be with you. And quite frankly, I think you're doing a wonderful service here. And you're You asked wonderful questions worthy of you being a summa cum laude graduate from BC.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Talk to you next time.